So far, we've covered 4 of the 9 broadcast towers in the Capital Wasteland. Today, we will cover 2 more, as well as a 3rd radio signal that we only find as part of a random encounter. To begin, we travel to the Grizzly Diner in the northeastern corner of the Capital Wasteland. We already visited this place when hunting down the Keller family holotapes, which led us to the location of their family fallout shelter hidden in the bowels of the National Guard Depot. You can watch that full story by clicking here. After clearing the raiders from the Grizzly Diner and the Talon Company mercs that spawn nearby, we head up the hill northeast, where we see a broadcast tower towering above. This is Relay Tower KXB811. Like many we've found before, we find it completely fenced off. But before I could go and open it, my Pip-Boy picks up another signal. Chinese radio beacon.
百胜，百胜！ 百胜，百胜！
It just repeats this same phrase over and over again. Bai sheng, bai sheng. This, in Mandarin Chinese, means must prevail. After wandering around in circles for a bit, I found the source of the broadcast, the corpse of a ghoulified Chinese officer. On his body is a plethora of Chinese gear. We find a small stash of chems, as well as a Chinese officer's sword, pistol, and jumpsuit. This is part of a random encounter. We don't ever find the broadcasting device. The way that this setup is put together mechanically, beneath this body is a ham radio buried under the ground, from which emits the signal. But we're never supposed to see that, which is why I don't show it here. Instead, once we discover this random encounter, the Chinese broadcast remains active forever, and we can tune into it whenever we come close to this corpse. We already learned from my video on Chinese spies that China has a presence here in the Capital Wasteland even 200 years after the apocalypse. It's quite possible that one of these Chinese ghouls left the factory that they have been using as a headquarters in search of their comrades, only to die to the wasteland's fauna. At any rate, we were about to head over to this broadcast tower and open the gate, but we find that it's locked with a very easy lock. After picking it, we find an electrical switch on a nearby tank. We pick up radio signal Oscar Zulu, and unlike all the others, this one has a message.
Not too far from radio relay tower outside of DC.
It's faint. The static is strong, but as we travel south and then east of this broadcast tower, we see that the signal gets stronger as we approach a drainage pipe.
If anyone can hear this, this is Bob Anderstein. Family and I have taken refuge in a drainage chamber not too far from a radio relay tower outside of DC. My boy is very sick, needs medical assistance. Please help if you can. We're listening for your response. 3950 kilohertz.
Inside, we go down a large sewer tunnel, and we see 2 doors on either side. The door to the right is already opened. Inside, we see 2 corpses on the ground, but no source of the signal. Turning around and opening the door to the east, we find a ham radio sitting on a table, and activating it, we can turn off radio signal Oscar Zulu. On this table, we find a copy of DC Journal of Internal Medicine and a pre-war book. We also find some Mentats and bottles of purified water on the ground near a bin. Turning around and heading back into that first room, we can examine the corpses on the ground. We find the skeleton of a man lying on his back holding the hand of presumably the skeleton of his wife. But we don't find the remains of their sick child. No corpse, no skeleton, just a puddle of blood on a nearby cot. Though we do find the child's toys, a stack of blocks, a toy car, and a crutch. We can loot an ammunition box on the top cot and unlock a very easy locked footlocker next to it. We just find randomized loot inside. On the nearby shelf, we can loot a first aid kit, and then we find some Radaway on the other shelf near to a toolbox. So what happened to this small family? Well, we find no signs of foul play, except for the puddle of blood on the cot. We don't find weapons, no pools of blood near heads. Well, here's how I interpret this evidence. The puddle of blood on the cot came from their very sick son. Perhaps he was wounded while the family rushed to find shelter here, or perhaps he was wounded by one of the wasteland's earliest raiders. The wound then became infected, and the boy began to grow seriously ill. The father used the ham radio to message for help, but after days or even weeks, no one came. Their son's condition worsened, and eventually he died from his wounds on this cot. Unable to bear with watching his son decompose around him, the father took his body topside, where he buried it. But in so doing, he exposed himself and his wife to the extremely toxic, radioactive fallout that permeated the capital wasteland in the weeks and months immediately after the bombs dropped. It was only a matter of time before the two of them died after being exposed. We don't find a grave for his son outside, so this is speculation, but it is the best way that I can interpret the evidence we find. To find the next broadcast tower, we need to head northwest of Evergreen Mills and southwest of Fort Bannister. Eventually, we crest a hill to arrive at a wrecked house, and immediately the raiders who inhabit the house attack.
Fucking kidding me? That hurts. Yeah, you a new asshole.
This is Charnel House. We can walk through a hole on the bottom floor to enter the house. Here we can loot the bodies and go down to a basement where we find 2 bundles of railway spikes. Charnel means carnal, or related to the body. In some places where the ground was too hard or it was otherwise impractical to bury the dead, people would erect charnel houses, where they would store corpses to allow them to rot away from human habitation. The phrase is also used more generally to describe any kind of structure where one finds skeletal remains or anything else related to death and destruction. A fitting name for a raider warren, especially since we also find a slew of frag mines just outside the house. We find them encircling Charnel House, and they're often hard to see. They share the same color as this rocky clay. After disarming all of the mines outside, we find a rubble ramp that leads up to the 2nd floor of Charnel House, where we find the bodies that give it its name. Near to a sniper's roost, we find 3 ammunition boxes and a copy of Duck and Cover on the ground to the east. From here, we can head up an earthen stair to the top of the nearby rocky outcropping. This is where that raider sniper tried to kill us. From here, we enjoy a wonderful view, and we can snipe off some of the more dangerous wildlife. Peering west, we see what looks like a broadcast tower hiding amongst the trees. But before we head that way, we can head north where we find the ruins of another house, this one reinforced by sandbags. Upon entering, we find an easy-locked ammunition box to the south and a first aid kit sitting on top a nearby bookshelf. Moving north, we hear a voice.
Cut it out.
Oh. This place is occupied by a wastelander. He functions as a merchant and he can repair our gear, but his repair skill is only 12. He has a store of goods here. Most of it is set to owned, including a sawed-off shotgun and some shotgun shells. But we do find a stack of purified water, which we can take without repercussions, as well as 2 pre-war books lying on this table. He must not know their value to Scribe Yearling. Against the western wall, we find our crate filled with Nuka-Cola. The Nuka-Colas are set to owned, but not the Nuka-Cola Quantum. I guess he's not a fan of the rather glowing effects drinking one of these does to the human body, so he's happy if we take it off his hands. From here, we can now head west. We see a large fence closing off a gap between 2 rocks. In the middle of the fence is a gate, and just south from this gate is a broadcast tower, but this one has no name. It's an unmarked location. If we flip the switch on the nearby canister, we pick up radio signal Papa November. This signal is Morse code like many of the others we've seen, and it has a similar message. Calling anyone, calling anyone, calling anyone. This is Papa November. Papa November, Papa November. Over. The signal gets stronger as we walk south of this unmarked broadcast tower. It gets strongest as we stand on a rocky outcropping overlooking the plane we just came from. Popping open our local map, we find an entrance to a drainage chamber directly below us. Peering forward, we see it. So hopping on down, we can open the sewer entrance to the drainage chamber. At the very bottom of the ladder, we see a bunch of trash and refuse, a surgical brace, a bunch of tin cans, and a copy of Pugilism Illustrated, right next to a pre-war book. Man, Scribe Yearling is going to be so happy. This room connects to a southern one, where we find a bunch of sandbags and a body lying next to the ham radio. Activating it turns off radio signal Papa November. This death is hard to explain. We find the body of a woman lying face down with blood beneath her body. But looking around, we don't really see anything that can explain it. We do find one bottle of Buffout. Looking up, we don't find a hatch or any other indication that she could have fallen to her death. There's a blood pack near to a cinder block, and then a bunch of boxed food and Wonder Glue with a little bit of purified water. No guns, no messages, no explanation. She must have suffered a violent death, which we can assume from all the blood. She likely received an open wound either on her face or on her chest. She lies face down, and the blood pools beneath her chest before draining to the north. The only objects I see that could be used as weapons are the two large cinder blocks we see lying on the ground. Now, I suppose she could have committed suicide by smashing one of these into her face before dropping it and falling to the ground. Or maybe it was an accident, and she tripped over one and fell down so hard that she broke her neck. Maybe this is just a murder victim, and this cistern was just a convenient place for the murderer to dispose of the body. Or maybe she was here with a companion, and she had something of value. Maybe some armor, a weapon, or a store of chems and goods. This companion, coveting these goods, or angry after being denied what he wanted, murdered her with a cinder block, stole the goods, and then hastened up the ladder. This may explain why we don't find anything of value down here aside from the magazine. That is my best explanation based on the evidence. But what's yours? Did you find these two radio signals in your gameplay? What do you make of the 200-year-old evidence we found? Let me know in the comments below. I'm working really hard this week on capturing footage for an upcoming DLC series, so my videos are going to be a little bit shorter this week. We've covered all but 2 of the broadcast towers and pre-war radio signals in the Capital Wasteland. If you want to make sure that you don't miss the final episode, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. I've got a shirt in the shop, folks. End of Dungeon Steamer Trunk. Don't you love the way it just rolls off the tongue? Well, if you do, you can celebrate this fact with a shirt. The shirt comes in a wide array of colors and a variety of sizes. I've got a bunch of other shirts, and many of these designs appear on other products as well, including mugs, pillows, and even smartphone cases. You can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook to keep up to date with all Oxhorn news. And if you like what I do, and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.